You might have seen the headlines this week. You probably haven't because we've all been talking about Trump and he's very good at that. But you might have seen the headlines. Keir Starmer firmly ruled out nationalising the steel industry. He spoke at an event in North Wales and he said, there's no case for nationalising the steel industry. What we need is partnership with business, not a return to the past. He doubled down saying Labour's Green Prosperity Plan would provide 2.5 billion for clean steel, but made it clear nationalisation is not our plan. That's ruffled some feathers, especially amongst trade unions and campaigners who see the steel sector as vital to the UK's economic resilience and climate transition. And also there's a lot of military bods who are saying it's key to our security. But let's not forget, the UK steel industry has been on life support for years, thousands of jobs have gone, and now we're importing more and more of the stuff, and particularly with this trade war, we may end up getting a load of Chinese steel dumped on us. So even as we talk about building big green infrastructure, the big question is, if the market can't keep this industry alive, should the state step in, right? Like that's the way that the news people frame it. I think we can ask some like bigger questions. I like the talk of the 4-day working week. I like things like that where, and it's not just steel. Obviously also we're talking about, there's lots of us talking about nationalizing energy, water, rail, the Royal Mail, so let's talk about it. Do you think, Chivers, we should nationalize British Steel? And, what should that look like if we do so?
Yeah, I mean, obviously we should, and we should have all of the sort of, major productive heights of the economy nationalised so that they're producing for public good rather than for private profit, right? That's the essential basis of all left-wing politics and the essential basis of any kind of alternative economic system that's going to get us out of this seemingly endless trench of decline and theft and corporate greed, etc., etc. I think particularly with steel, it's a really interesting one because where Starmer talks about green steel, I imagine what he's talking about is electric arc furnaces. So the way you make steel is you get some stuff, you stick it in a big furnace that's powered by a lot of coal, it gets very, very hot, melts the materials, and bang, you've got steel at the end of it. That's very, very carbon intensive because you're having to burn stuff to make the heat to melt steel together. Electric arc furnaces are like, okay, well, instead of using nasty polluting coal, we'll use like 2 little electric dingles and they make a really, really hot arc of plasma that melts the steel and doesn't make any nasty pollution, or like some pollution, because that's what happens when you melt stuff, but nowhere near as much as blast furnaces. That is a very different labour process in terms of like how many people you need to deal with it and how many ongoing processes of like putting fuel in the blast furnace versus flicking a switch on an electric arc to melt steel. So like it's very important that we have steel because you need it to make stuff. And the biggest...
Yo, that's a statement I have.
Insights 101.
Yeah, the biggest use of steel in this country is like railway tracks. And it's one of the thinnest areas of the economy where actually it's kind of like an insulated system in the sense of like we make it here and it stays here. And some of it's exported for profit, but actually a lot of it is used here to make stuff. So if you want like to grow the economy in a real material productive sense, to like increase the number of people using trains and building trains and getting people employed to build the trains, you need the steel and you need the people to make the steel. But like also if you want to do it greenly, nicely, you need a lot of energy to do that because it's super, super energy intensive, more so than just sticking coal in a big furnace. So now you're talking about building wind farms and power plants, and is there enough? So it's all of these questions of like nationalising steel is not just, hooray, we've done it, we've saved the factory and kept people in work and stuck a great big union flag on it. It's like, how do you integrate that into a wider transformation of the economy that recognises that all of this stuff has got to be used in a kind of circular, productive manner? I think this is, and it's really funny that, Starmer like 2 days ago was saying categorically we've ruled out nationalising British Steel, and then like the next day Rachel Reeves says, well, hang on, there might actually be something there. And I think what she means is like the British public will take on the debt and private financiers will get to walk off with the profits when it starts being profitable again. That's what she really means by nationalising, but like it is not, it's a quick fix in the sense of like it's something that obviously should be done for basic principles of like economics for public good, but you've got to look at it in the sense of like how much else you have to transform to actually make it useful and productive for the economy and for people as a whole, rather than just saying hooray, we've nationalised something, on to the next business.
So, we need a sort of tied up industrial strategy, right? What do we produce and how? And we could be building a green economy. We could also be building an economy where, I think to your point, Mercedes, we work less. Like there's
all this automation in China.
Yeah.
If they can do it.
But the way that automation works, even in China, is okay, you automate stuff, less people have jobs. Instead of, you see, what I would like to see, I think when we think about nationalisation, we think about it in this kind of old way that was done up until the 1970s, from the sort of 40s to the 70s largely, which is the state owns it, decides what to do, blah, 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 and it runs it essentially like a business. But if it was a cooperative, right, like if it was mutually owned by the workers, like the workers actually owned their work, every time there was like a technological improvement and there was research, investment into research and development, and they were like, right, we can do this quicker, cheaper, we can get a machine to do this. Instead of people being told, well, you've not got a job now, fuck off. Like, we could say, cool, you now have to work 2 days less a week because we don't need you here as much. Do you know what I mean? You should be sharing in the benefits of it. Like, we invest in the technology, and then the workers as well as the public sharing the benefits of this. I never hear that really from the unions or anything. There was some talk about this. There was the I think it was called the Lucas Plan in Australia, where they like tried to come up with in the 70s a sort of work with the environmentalists and the trade unions work together to say, like, what we need to do is create green economy together, where actually workers get to work less because everything that we're producing, like renewable energy, means that once you've got the renewable energy set up, no one needs to work on it. Like, you maintain it, but you don't have to, it's not like other forms of energy where you constantly having to mine coal, for instance. So they were trying to say, like, let's have a transition for coal miners in the 70s so that you don't, like, coal miners, for instance, are still to this day very much for let's open more coal mines. Like, they want that to happen. And I want to support the working class, have jobs that have dignity and pay well, right? And so I get torn sometimes. I'm like, yeah, I understand why you want to open a coal mine. You want more. Jeremy Corbyn was in favor of opening more coal mines, right? Like, that's what they want, because they want jobs with dignity and meaning and pride, but also good pay. And they want to be able to people want to be able to look after each other and their families and their communities, right? And so I think something like the Lucas Plan says, yeah, we nationalize things, but we also work towards making them green in a way that protects the workers who are working in those polluting industries and gives them dignity and respect and, quite frankly, less shit work to do. Like that, I think that's the way forward, and that's what I want to see when we're talking about discussing like nationalizing steel.
I mean, the whole conversation, I keep thinking about the chat we had about natural monopolies and the way that, and like the railway system, and that being, like you said, owned by the people that work to sustain it as opposed to simply nationalized.
What do you mean by that then? What's it that makes you think about there?
Because you're talking about steel and then you're talking about trains, and then I'm thinking about how shit these trains are and how
Yeah,
expensive they are and how I should not be paying this much just to go to
yeah,
fucking London every once in a while.
yeah.
That's what.
Well, part of the cost, right, is that every part of the process is privatized. It's not just that the rail company is privatized and both National Rail, which owns the tracks, and the train companies that are on it are privatized, and they're taking all the profit and charging more, and they're getting taxpayer subsidies, by the way, huge taxpayer subsidies. It's not just that that's happening, it's that the steel that's produced, the carriages, they're all produced by like private companies, are all making their profit first and foremost. If a great deal of that is nationalized, right, like if the steel is, but also maybe where they make the seats, and the materials for the seats are kind of nationalized and so forth, then you don't charge profit on top. You just charge what's necessary, the cost of the thing. That's going to drive down prices across the board. It's, so I think, yeah, people miss a trick when we're talking about like nationalizing rail, which Labour are sort of doing slowly over the next few years, which is we want all these other areas. And I also think, like I said, we're missing this trick where we talk about it, where we say, yeah, the government controls these things. I don't want the government to control these natural monopolies. I don't trust the bloody government.
Me neither.
No one trusts the government, right? Like, I think like there's only one profession that's less trusted than politician, and it's journalists, which is really sad. But like, it's the least trusted profession in Britain is politicians. Why on earth would we give them control? I'd rather National Steel have a national board that we elect part of, and is elected partially by the workers and partially by experts in the other industries that it's related to, and that be the governance model. That's how it's controlled, like that's what I want to see, and I want to see that for all industries, and that's what I want us to be talking about. I think, Tom, that's the kind of thing you talk about with the BBC, and we're going to do a special episode, but broad, just quickly, what kind of model of nationalization do you envisage being good for these industries like steel? Because we don't want blue steel any longer.
Yeah, I think it's got to be some kind of model across these industries that like puts first and foremost the conditions and the rights and the prosperity of the people working in these industries ahead of like whoever's going to be making the profits from it. It's funny listening to you talk about like how, you know, some of these essential natural monopoly industries or industries that are so central to public life are like owned by private companies. And actually, that, you know, a lot of our rail and our energy and other like major areas of our economy are already nationalized, but they're nationalized because the companies are owned by other foreign governments, right? So our energy is like, a lot of our energy is owned by EDF, which is a French national company. A lot of our train networks are owned by, I think, like Dutch and French companies as well. So there are like major sections of our economy where, you know, and this isn't meant to be a point of, you know, economic protectionism and nationalism and, oh, you know, we should own this stuff and the dirty foreigner shouldn't own it. But actually, like, if it's good enough for them, it should be good enough for us. If it's good enough that like a major developed economy see it as important that, you know, these are areas of the economy and production which are always going to have levels of demand because we need steel and we need trains and we need energy, then why shouldn't they be produced on a basis of public good? And yeah, I agree that, like, you know, the kind of multi-stakeholderism approach of economic management has to come above basically expecting the government to decide this is where our particular levels of investment or interest want to go. So economic organisation in any basic sense has to have at its core, you know, the workers deciding this is what we want our conditions to be, this is what we want our productive capacity to be, and this is how we get there. And we work with the people who are buying our goods and the people who are employing us to actually come to some sort of settlement, rather than a private corporate executive or a government minister just pointing and saying, do the stuff over here, make it happen, and if you don't, I'm going to sack you. There's going to be a much sort of longer term embedded relationship between the work we need to get the economy running and the people who we are hoping and expecting to do that work.
Yeah. So if, like me, you're super pissed at Labour's blue steel position, and yes, I'm going to keep using blue steel until it sticks. That's the title of this segment. Then let's talk about how we get there. Because if we do want to bring key industries back into public hands, and by the way, we haven't even talked about water, which we have to get done ASAP. How do we make that happen? One recent win we can learn from is the buses in Greater Manchester. After years of campaigning from Better Buses Greater Manchester, we own...
Burnout. Big up Andy.
Don't big up Andy. Andy's just a politician. Big up the campaign. Look, it is great that he's taking credit for a win that comes from campaigners, because I want politicians to see that they can become more popular by doing, funnily enough, popular things. Is insanely popular. It's like 85% of the British public, broadly speaking, between 80 and 90% on all polls, and almost all industries that are polled on, people support it. You can't get 80% of British people to agree on what to have for breakfast.
I think you can, actually.
Actually, yeah, it's actually an English breakfast.
Actually decided.
So we've got two things we agree on, and everything else we don't agree on, right? Like, obviously, we know why they don't do this. We know that it's because they're in the hands of lobbyists, and there's a sort of revolving door. And there's lots of great reporting. Byline Times, there's a lot of great reporting on this, on the think tanks and the sort of web of intrigue that keeps British politicians pro-privatisation and against, you know, creating national wealth and protecting national resources or people's resources that we need. We know why that happens. But anyways, Burnham got popular. He did a popular thing because it was cool, but because also campaigners from Better Buses Greater Manchester, We Own It, and, you know, lots of campaigning Mancunian citizens from trade unions and community groups got on it, and they brought buses back under public control. It's incredibly popular. It's had some great effects, both in terms of, by the way, greening the transport fleet as well, in terms of energy as well. So it has, like, not just like it's cheaper, it's more reliable, you know, it runs better, it's more interconnected with the tram system. They're now looking at connecting it with the rail system into Lancashire, right? But Andy Burnham's talking about it. He says Northern Rail, he said, which is a private company at the moment, and it runs terribly. But if you live in, say, Blackburn or Bolton or a Lancashire town that's kind of part of Greater Manchester, some of them are part of Greater Manchester and some of them are Lancashire, you know, he said you can't be relying on these bad rail networks that run by a private company that's run it into the ground. He says it needs to be brought into public control. So he's saying, like, tie that into the municipal network. So there's two things here. One, campaigners can get it. But two, I found this really interesting research, which is the return of public ownership by the Transnational Institute, which we'll include in the newsletter. And it's a brilliant global overview of the trend of remunicipalization, which, God, they have to come up with tough words. It means bringing things under control at the city level. example, where public services like water, energy, and transport are being taken back into public hands. It documents over 1,400 cases in 2,400 cities across 58 countries since the year 2000. Major wins include Paris's water, Berlin's energy, and public transport in cities like Jakarta. By the way, it's a great little video documentary on Jakarta's public transport system. It's incredible what they've done. And it sort of dives into why this is happening and the failed promises of privatization, high prices, poor services, and sort of lack of control. I think actually that always gets underplayed as well. It's like if you're in a poor service area for buses, there's nothing you can do. If the buses are privately owned, what are you going to do? Write to the bus company. Whereas when they're public control, you say, look, we need better bus services here. And I've got elected representatives as the councillors that I can speak to. I can speak to the council, and I think all of us would like to feel like we had a bit of control over the important things in our life. And a third of British people don't drive. And in cities, that increases in number even more. Like lots of people don't drive. So they are reliant on public transport. And I don't drive. And it's the worst feeling in the world that you are dependent on something you have no control over. Like it's just really awful. And I think that's one of the things that gets lost in this conversation is that we're not just fighting for cheaper prices and a lot of very practical things. We're fighting for a sense of feeling of control over our own lives. And I think municipalization is potentially a really great move. We're seeing a lot of stuff. If Debs was here, could talk about South Yorkshire, about bringing food systems together with transport systems and things like that. So I think that's a good direction to travel. Tom, have you seen any examples that you think are really good ways of talking about or fighting for nationalisation and bringing things into public control?
No, I think, what cuts across a lot of these different campaigns we've seen, and it's always interesting that so many of them are sort of condensed into the north, at least here in the UK, sort of condensed into the north of England, where a lot of the roots of cooperative and socialist political movements have come from, is that underlying argument of we have lost so much control over the basic facets of our everyday life, and not just that we've lost it, but that control has now been commercialized and privatized and turned against us in a way that it's not just we've lost control, it's something that's actively working against our own interests and holding us back in our basic capacity and liberty as human beings. So I think that's got to be so core to any argument about all sorts of left-wing transformative economics that we need to live up to this moment, is to put it in people's faces. You do not have control over major parts of your life that matter to how you get on, but you could have that control if we took these relatively straightforward but transformative steps in the economy and in media and culture and the organisation of local decision making around councils or municipal organisations. It's the only way to face up to the moment, because without that control, without that individual sense of you are a part of something and you have a power and a say within it as both an individual and as a collective part of an equal and shared whole, then people are going to continue to withdraw from democratic institutions or shared collective ideals of what it means to be a citizen in a nation, and we will be finally fully the individualized economic unit that so much of neoliberalism wishes for us to be. Those are the two paths ahead of us, is take back control for individuals and make us meaningful, liberated people with power and control over all our lives, or we'll just turn into individual atomized units who are there to extract profit from until we die.
Yeah, to be divided and ruled. Yeah, Mercedes, that's why we're talking about this today. That's why we're talking about Blue Steel. I mean, some of this seems really distant, but the first segment we were talking about this global financial crisis that's occurring, this trade war, the buffeting winds that are going to drag us into recession and make our lives worse. And in those things, we're sort of these giants of the world of fighting over things that we don't fully understand and we certainly have no control over. It's very easy to just be sort of disappear into either doom scrolling and enjoying kind of the horror of it all, or try and remove ourselves from it altogether. Certainly to feel lost and disconnected from all of this. And I think what we should do on this show, and generally the movement should be doing, is actually talking about nationalisation and municipalisation non-stop. I think Gary Stevenson does a great job, and he talks about wealth taxes non-stop. And I think that's cool. I think actually if you look at the research, wealth taxes will only provide actually not a huge amount. Actually, I think we should do them on the principle of the thing, and I think we should be starting to rebalance the economy that way. But also, we are depending on a national government there to do something that it really doesn't want to do, right? And I think that's a good thing. But I think we should do the same thing as him, which is I think we should bang on every episode about nationalisation and municipalisation, like taking things under control for us. Because when all of this is happening, and we're going to be doing the news now, and week in, week out, we're going to be talking about what Trump has done, what some tech oligarch has done, what some billionaire has done to us, or some other foreign nation state, let's say, or even our own nation state, right, has done to us. We need to be talking about how we take back control for ourselves, how we really take back control. And this is how it's going to be done for me, for my money. Now, do you think like that's assessment's fair, or do you think we should go Gary Economics route, or maybe another route,
No, we don't need to be like Gary. But
He's great.
I keep thinking about, I didn't say he wasn't. We keep using this word control, which I think is really amusing because, funnily enough, I remember when I was in Denmark and we were using the public transport there, and there would just be something running in both directions every 5 minutes. There was just this like sense of complete relief. As someone who's late to like everything, I mean, as much as you know this, either I'm exactly on time or I'm late because the idea of being early is just not an option. There was genuinely such a relief that like spiritually left my body as I was realizing that actually, if I can rely on transport coming every 5 minutes, not to say that this is necessarily like applicable in every city and every place and every like locality, but that ability to just like be like, wow, it's okay if I miss this one because the next one's in 5 minutes. I don't even have to wait 10 minutes, 5 minutes. This like idea to need to control, I think, kind of leaves your body a wee bit. You're like, actually, I can chill. I can relax. This is so reliable, right? We've invested into this infrastructure that is so reliable, that is of quality, that like meets my needs and like collectively the needs of everyone else. My desire, my need to like feel I have this like utter and complete control, like it really goes.
And that's what people in London have if you can afford the tube, but and to a lesser extent with the buses. But again, if you've lived anywhere else and you've done that nightmare, like sort of, I mean, I used to look at the physical bus lamppost or whatever, the bus station, and look at the times and be like, oh my God, okay, it's going to be 25 minutes and then it's 18 minutes to the one after that or whatever it is. Or now you'd be like scrolling your phone looking for when the times are and you're planning your route and you have to be, we could do away with that, day in, day out worry. And I think that'd be a beautiful thing. So I think that's worth fighting for. And I think if you're interested, we'll put some links in the newsletter, but definitely, if you check out nothing else, check out We Own It. We Own It. They are fighting for nationalisation of all those good things we're talking about and a bunch of things we haven't even spoken about there. Some great stuff at council level and things like that. Check them out, support them, get on their mailing list and support their campaigns. They won Better Buses Greater Manchester. They've had other wins as well. And I think if you want to be part of something that makes you feel good, like you're fighting for something that gives you control, makes the world a better place, makes things cheaper, and that you can actually win because these guys win, then check out We Own It.